What's going on, guys? I'm Pete, and this is Retro Game Attic. CRTs have been the gold standard for retro gaming, but there is a new trend of people ditching their CRTs for LCDs, and I figured I'd check it out for myself. Now, I am a little biased towards Trinitron CRTs, so I'm going to stick with the Sony theme here and compare PSOne gameplay on two old-school Sony LCD screens from the same era. The first display I have is a Sony SDM-X72 from the early 2000s, and the other is the renowned Sony PSOne LCD screen. I picked a handful of random games to display on these, so let's check out how they stack up against each other. Alright, so this Sony LCD screen unfortunately doesn't have AV hookup, so the first thing I did was head on over to Amazon and I purchased an AV to VGA video converter. So let's hook this thing up. It has its own power source. I'll hook up the VGA cable, the audio cable, and now let's get the PS1 all situated here. Alright, we're good to go. So the first game I'm going to try out is the original Rayman. And right off the bat, you can see that the PS1 LCD screen is a lot brighter than the X72 screen. And keep in mind, I have the brightness turned up all the way on both of the screens. And for this first game here, I'm not going to edit any of the load times out, just so you have a feel of how it was back in the day. And it does take a while, it's like 30 seconds or so. I mean, that's how it was back then, we just dealt with it, or played N64. So as we progress through these screens, the brightness issue isn't as apparent as it was initially. And now finally, you can see that little opening animation, and seeing them side by side, the differences aren't that apparent from the get-go. Alright, so here's the title screen. There is like a slight little bit of a color difference, it looks like, between the two. I don't know, I messed around with the color settings of the X72 to try to get it as balanced as possible. We'll start up the game. Here's that little opening animation. So the colors in the original Rayman always popped to me, and it just seemed like a very bright and vibrant game. And it's super apparent on the PS1 LCD screen. Like, this thing just looks amazing on there. I can't overstate how good it looks. It doesn't look terrible on the X72. It kind of almost looks washed out to me, like the details aren't as crisp, but that's kind of just par for the course with an old school LCD screen like this. But let's keep playing and see if it gets any better. As I go through the level here, it's pretty apparent how superior the LCD screen is on the PS1, but that's what it was intended for, so it's not surprising. I'm not 100% sure what it was initially intended for, but the X72 seems to be more of a computer-focused monitor and not really on gaming. There seems to be very slight ghosting and some sort of motion artifacts on the X72 that are kind of apparent when you see it in person. Not a deal breaker, but it's just something I think I'd point out. And again, the colors just really pop on that PS1 LCD screen. Given the smaller size of the LCD screen, it's not super surprising, since for the most part, games do look better on smaller screens. And then another thing too I should point out here is that the audio of the PS1 LCD screen is actually pretty good. The same can't be said for the X72 monitor. It has these two tiny internal speakers that I had turned up all the way and you can barely hear them. And those internal speakers on the X72 are more for just system sounds. Given that the X72 has an audio jack, you would hook up external speakers to it so you can actually hear the audio. So let's keep going here. I remember when this game first came out, it was mind-blowing just how beautiful and vibrant the atmosphere and just the environments were. So we're finally punching enemies and progressing a little bit quicker. For Rayman, I'm going to give the win to the PS1 LCD screen, but let's try another brightly colored game, PaRappa the Rapper. And again, the visuals on PaRappa are a little cartoony as well, so it would be interesting to see how these two stack up. And since sound is such an important part of this game, I'm not going to comment on it because the speakers of the PS1 screen are far superior to the X72. And again, that brightness on the PS1 LCD screen does wonders for these colorful games. It looks so much better on there. But the X72 is holding its own here. Okay, so we're up to Master Onion. I don't know why, but this play session I was horrible at. I'm not usually this bad. I've had this game since it came out. And again, the gameplay is just looking so much better on the PS1 LCD. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the X72, given its computer nature, has an anti-glare hard coating on its screen. It's just not going to stack up. It does have a much higher resolution than the PS1 LCD as well, but you would never know when playing this game. And I'll mention that the vertical refresh rate on the SDM-X72 is 56 to 85 Hz in analog mode, which is pretty decent for the time. I mean, it's just not going to look as good as a CRT, and that refresh rate doesn't really hurt it too bad. It looks decent. Alright, so we're done watching me suck here, and I was so awful that he actually had to stop, so let's move on to the next one. So we tried two colorful games before, and a lot of the PS1 games were kind of like muddy and muffled in my opinion. They kind of had like that brown and just dark aesthetic, so let's try a few of those to see if there's any difference. And the first game here, we'll do the original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. And here's the opening animation. And the differences between the colors, at least to me, aren't as apparent now with like a darker and less colorful game. It's actually pretty close between the two, and it's kind of apparent on this opening animation. And of course it animates pretty smoothly on the PS1 screen, and then the X72 is decent as well. I don't have a memory card inserted, so there's no save data or anything like that, but we'll go with Bob Burnquist. And color me impressed. I mean, between the two, aside from just the overall brightness of the PS1 screen, they both look pretty good, and the X72 is really holding its own. And I guess with these polygonal character models, they actually look pretty good. Much better than Rayman at least, which is a sprite-based game. Smooth animation on both. I mean, the PS1 screen, we already know that it's made for the PlayStation, so it's probably going to look and sound and feel a lot better. And if I was going to play this game for a longer play session, I would probably choose the X72 since it's 17 inches and it's just easier to see. Let's move on to the next one. So I'm going to try Twisted Metal 2. My friends and I played so much of the multiplayer mode back in the day, it was insane. But for some reason, I can't get past this loading screen, so let's try the original game. And again, another dark game. Not so many bright colors here. And as you can see on the title screen, there's not too much of a differentiation between the two. Yeah, I think these polygonal models do wonders for the X72. It handles it a lot better. And I didn't play the original as much as the second one, because in my opinion, the second one just blows the first out of the water, but let's try it. We'll try Thumper with that old school Impala. So I totally forgot in the original, it's just a one-on-one match, and then they really up the ante with the second installment because there's a lot more cars on the board and a lot more mayhem, of course. Dark, muddy, not a lot going on, but both are projecting the image pretty smoothly, and I'm gonna have to say for this dark game, I'm gonna probably prefer the X72 just because it's a lot easier to see what's going on. That little screen, it's a little tough after a while. And so the last game here, I'm going to go with another dark game, and I guess we'll stick with the car theme. This is Need for Speed High Stakes. Opening animation looks great on both. And this is another game I used to love, just because it had the Camaro and the Firebird and a Caprice, which is awesome. But we'll stick with the Firebird Trans Am here. The colors pretty much align with one another on both monitors, so it's not super surprising because this game was probably developed with PC in mind. And it runs great on both. Yeah, the movements and animation look great. There's a little bit of ghosting when you get closer to the cop car, but other than that, they're pretty evenly matched up in my opinion, which is super surprising. And I got fine. And that was the PS1 LCD screen versus the Sony SDM-X72 LCD display. As the name implies, the PS1 screen is superior for gaming since it was built specifically for the PS1 console. It's brighter, has better color differentiation, and is much sharper than the X72. But I have to say that after playing these side by side, I actually prefer the X72 overall. Sure, the games don't present as well on it, but I think overall it's better suited for everyday gaming. The PS1 LCD is obviously awesome, but it is a bit more of a novelty and just a cool display piece. So what did you guys think? Do you game on an LCD monitor? Was this a big waste of time? Please let me know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you so much for checking out Retro Game Attic. I seriously appreciate you all, and I will catch you on the next one. Later.